Tonight, we drift back in time to a place where the very first cities rose from the earth, to a land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a land the ancients called Sumer. Here, more than 5,000 years ago, people gathered, built, and dreamed. They tamed the floods of the rivers, turned barren soil into golden fields of grain, and carved the first words into clay. From these people came stories of gods and kings, of battles and bargains, of love and loss. From their hands came law, writing, mathematics, and music, the seeds of civilization itself. Mesopotamia, the cradle of history, lay in the heart of the Fertile Crescent, where water and soil made life possible. To the north were rugged mountains, to the south vast deserts. Yet here, in this narrow band of rivers, humanity built something lasting. As we begin this journey, I invite you to let your mind drift gently, as if carried by the slow current of the Euphrates. There is no rush. We will wander together through the streets of Uruk, stand in the shadow of towering ziggurats, listen to the chants of priests, and follow the rise and fall of kings. So settle in, breathe deeply, and allow the story of the Sumerians to guide you toward rest. Thousands of years of history stretch before us, and tonight you will drift peacefully through it all. To begin the story of the Sumerians, we must first imagine the land they called home. It was a place unlike any other in the ancient world, shaped by two great rivers. To the east, the swift and sometimes violent Tigris. To the west, the broader and more meandering Euphrates. These rivers flowed down from distant mountains and spread into the flat plains of Mesopotamia, a Greek word meaning the land between rivers. It was here that the Sumerians made their lives, building what many call the first civilization. The land itself was harsh and unforgiving. To the north stretched rocky hills and rugged terrain, but in the south lay a vast, flat expanse with no natural boundaries. There were no forests to provide wood, and no rich veins of stone or metal waiting beneath the soil. The summers were blistering hot, and the winds carried dust across the plains. Yet despite these difficulties, the land held one great gift. When the rivers flooded, they left behind a fine, dark silt. That silt enriched the soil, making it fertile enough to grow crops in abundance. With careful planting, barley, wheat, dates, and vegetables could flourish. Without the rivers, there would have been nothing but desert. With them, life became possible. But the waters were unpredictable. Floods could come suddenly and with great force, sweeping away fields, homes, and entire communities. At other times, the rivers ran too low, leaving crops to wither in the heat. The Sumerians quickly learned that survival depended on mastering these waters. This challenge would shape their society more than any other. To live in Mesopotamia required cooperation. Families and neighbors built canals to bring river water to their fields. Dikes and levees were raised to hold back floods. Irrigation ditches carried water across the land, and channels were carefully opened and closed to guide the flow. No single person could manage such tasks alone. Communities had to work together, plan together, and resolve disputes over water. In this way, the first shared systems of farming were born. Out of necessity, people came together to shape the land, and in doing so, they also shaped themselves. In time, small farming villages grew into larger settlements. Among the earliest was Eridu, a place that Sumerian tradition later remembered as the very first city. There, people built simple homes of mud brick and began to erect temples to honor their gods. To the north rose Uruk, which would one day become the greatest of the Sumerian cities, its walls stretching farther than any seen before. Nearby stood another settlement destined to leave a lasting mark on history. These cities did not appear overnight. They were the result of countless years of careful labor, as farmers turned the marshy floodplains into orderly fields, and builders transformed mud and clay into homes, temples, and storehouses. Every canal dug and every wall raised was a response to the land itself. The rivers could give, but they could also take away. In learning to live with this balance, the Sumerians laid the foundation for the first urban civilization. The land between the Tigris and the Euphrates was not an easy place to call home, yet it was precisely this challenge that brought people together. The struggle against nature became the spark of invention, cooperation, and belief. In this land of rivers and floods, the first chapters of human history were written in clay and carried forward by the flowing waters of Mesopotamia. As generations passed in the land of Sumer, the scattered farming villages slowly began to grow. At first, they were simple communities, no more than a cluster of reed huts or mud brick homes built near the water channels. Families tended their fields, stored their grain, and looked to the rivers for survival. Yet the rivers were not always kind, and the unpredictable floods often reminded the people that life here required more than the effort of a single household. In order to manage irrigation canals and to keep food supplies secure, these early villages needed cooperation. A broken levee or an abandoned canal could mean disaster, not just for one farmer, but for an entire community. People came together to plan, to repair, and to watch over the waters. In time, this cooperation created stronger bonds between families, and with those bonds came the first signs of organized leadership. As villages grew larger, new challenges appeared. Disputes over water rights or over fields had to be settled, and the presence of leaders became more important. At first, the elders of a village might gather to make decisions. Over time, however, certain figures emerged who carried both authority and religious importance. These were the priests, men who claimed to understand the will of the gods and who organized the labor of their people. In these growing communities, temples soon became the center of life. Built upon raised platforms, these structures reached toward the sky and stood as both a spiritual and social hub. The temples were the storehouses of grain, the places where offerings were made, and the spaces where records of labor and trade were kept. As the centuries passed, these platforms grew higher and more elaborate, eventually forming the massive step towers known as ziggurats. Rising above the flat landscape of Sumer, a ziggurat was visible for miles, a reminder that both the gods and the priests watched over the city. The need to protect resources and people also encouraged the building of walls. At first, villages may have used ditches and simple barriers of mud, but as populations increased and as rivalries with neighboring settlements grew, stronger defenses became essential. Brick by brick, walls of baked clay surrounded the larger communities, transforming them into true city-states. These were not just places of farming, but centers of trade, worship, and administration. Behind the walls lived farmers, craftsmen, merchants, priests, and laborers, all connected by the shared rhythm of life that the city imposed. With the rise of the city came the rise of the administrators. Priests could not manage every detail of irrigation, trade, and offerings. Scribes began to keep records of harvests, storehouses, and agreements between citizens. Officials measured fields, counted livestock, and tracked the movement of goods. The city required order, and this order could only be maintained through careful management. From these beginnings, the city-state became the foundation of Sumerian civilization. Each city was independent, with its own patron deity, its own walls, and its own rulers. Yet all shared the same challenges and the same reliance on the rivers. The transformation from villages to cities was not sudden, but steady, born of necessity, labor, and belief. By learning to live together and to organize their efforts, the people of Sumer laid down the structure of urban life that would echo through all of history. As the Sumerian city-states grew, they required leadership stronger than that of priests and local administrators. Irrigation canals had to be defended, walls had to be built, and disputes with neighboring cities demanded decisive action. Out of this need rose the first kings, figures who combined authority, power, and divine blessing. In the Sumerian memory, these kings were not just rulers, but legendary figures whose names carried both history and myth. The Sumerian king list, a document written on clay tablets, preserves the names of rulers who were believed to have reigned in the earliest times. According to this list, kingship descended from the heavens, granted by the gods to humankind. The very first king named was Alulim of Eridu, who was said to have ruled for thousands of years. To later generations, Alulim was not just a man, but a symbol of the divine order of kingship. His reign marked the beginning of human governance blessed by the gods. This idea that kingship was a divine gift shaped the way Sumerians viewed authority. A king was not chosen by the people, nor raised by his own strength alone. He was believed to have been appointed by the gods to guide the city, defend it, and keep the rituals of the temples. Kingship was sacred, and the king was both servant and representative of the divine realm. Within the Sumerian cities, two important titles appeared, Lugal and Ensi. The term Ensai originally referred to a governor, someone who managed the day-to-day affairs of the city and ensured that the fields, canals, and temples were maintained. In many places, the Ensi was closely tied to the temple and acted as a steward of the city's god. The Lugal, whose name means great man, held a wider and more commanding authority. A Lugal was a king in the full sense, leading armies, expanding territory, and ruling not just as administrator, but as sovereign. In practice, the lines between Lugal and Ensi could blur. Some rulers held both roles at once, while others began as governors and rose to kingship through military strength. What is clear is that as rivalries between city-states grew, the need for strong leaders with armies became greater. The Lugal emerged as the dominant figure of Sumerian political life. Kings were expected to fulfill many roles. They were warriors, leading their people into battle to protect farmland and trade routes. They were builders, overseeing the construction of canals, temples, and city walls. Their inscriptions often boasted of canals dug, ziggurats raised, and cities strengthened under their rule. Kings were also mediators between their people and the gods. Though priests conducted daily rituals, it was the king who ensured that the gods were honored with festivals, offerings, and monuments. A successful king was one who could claim both military victories and divine favor. The first kings of Sumer were remembered as larger-than-life figures. They were seen as protectors chosen by the gods, as leaders who transformed fragile settlements into powerful city-states. Their legacy was not just in the fields they irrigated or the temples they built, but in the very idea of kingship itself. For the Sumerians, to be ruled by a king was to live under the order of heaven, and in this belief they established a model of leadership that would endure for millennia. The Sumerians lived in a world where the forces of nature were unpredictable and often overwhelming. Floods could sweep away homes and fields, storms could darken the sky without warning, and the summer sun could scorch the land until crops withered. To make sense of this fragile existence, they turned to the divine. For the Sumerians, every aspect of the natural world was ruled by gods and goddesses. These deities were powerful, unpredictable, and deeply human in their emotions. They loved and quarreled, rewarded and punished. And in their actions, the Sumerians saw the reflection of their own lives. At the head of the pantheon stood An, the god of the heavens. He was the distant ruler of the sky, often viewed as the father of the gods. Though not always active in myths, An represented the vast and unreachable dome of heaven that covered the world. Beneath him was Enlil, the god of wind and storms. Enlil was both creator and destroyer. He brought fertile winds that carried seeds across the land, yet he could also unleash violent tempests that tore down crops and homes. The Sumerians both revered and feared him, for in Enlil they saw the unpredictable power of the atmosphere. Another central figure was Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Unlike the sometimes harsh Enlil, Enki was known for his cleverness and generosity. He was the bringer of knowledge, teaching humanity skills such as writing, irrigation, and craftsmanship. His waters, both from rivers and underground sources, sustained life in a land that was otherwise dry and harsh. In myths, Enki often acted as a mediator, using his wisdom to guide both gods and humans. Among the most beloved and complex deities was Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. She embodied the dual nature of creation and destruction. Inanna brought passion, abundance, and the joys of life, yet she also marched into battle with unmatched ferocity. Her myths tell of her descent into the underworld, her rivalries with other gods, and her role as both nurturer and conqueror. For the Sumerians, she represented the intensity of human desire and the unpredictable turns of fortune. Utu, the sun god, brought light to the world each day and served as a divine judge. As he crossed the sky, he illuminated truth and dispelled lies. The Sumerians looked to him as the source of justice and fairness, for nothing could be hidden from the sun. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, symbolized the fertile earth itself. She gave birth to both gods and humans, and in her, the Sumerians saw the nurturing soil that sustained their crops. Together, these deities formed a pantheon that explained the mysteries of life and nature. To honor their gods, the Sumerians built temples at the heart of their cities. These temples were not only places of worship, but also the center of economic and social life, Priests offered food, drink, and incense to the gods each day. Citizens brought gifts to seek favor or forgiveness. Festivals marked the cycles of the seasons, giving thanks for harvests and praying for protection from disaster. Atop the towering ziggurats, closer to the heavens, priests performed rituals meant to bridge the distance between human and divine. Through their myths, rituals, and daily devotion, the Sumerians lived in constant dialogue with their gods. They believed that their survival depended on keeping the divine forces content, and in return, they hoped for fertile fields, safety from floods, and peace within their walls. The pantheon of Sumer was not distant or abstract, but present in every field of barley, every storm, and every ray of sunlight. In honoring their gods, the Sumerians gave meaning to the struggles and triumphs of life in the land between rivers. To understand the Sumerians, it is not enough to speak only of their kings and gods. The real story of this civilization lies in the rhythm of daily life. Within the walls of their cities and across the fields that stretched to the rivers, men and women carried out tasks that fed their families, built their communities, and sustained their culture. Each day followed the cycles of the sun, the seasons, and the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. The majority of Sumerians were farmers, and at dawn they walked to their fields, often with simple tools made of wood or bronze. With the help of plows pulled by oxen, they turned the soil, guided the flow of irrigation water, and planted seeds of barley and wheat. Farming was demanding work, yet it provided the foundation for the entire society. From the farmer's grain came bread, beer, and trade goods. Without the farmer, no city could thrive. Alongside the farmers worked the craftsmen. These men and women shaped the raw materials of the land into useful and beautiful objects. Potters turned clay into jars, bowls, and storage vessels. Weavers spun wool into cloth, producing garments that were both practical and decorated with colorful patterns. Metalworkers shaped copper into tools, weapons, and ornaments, while carpenters fashioned furniture and wagons. Their skills brought comfort and order to daily life, and their work filled the markets of the city. Merchants connected Sumer to the wider world. With pack animals and boats, they carried goods along rivers and over distant trade routes. In the bustling markets, one might see baskets of grain, bundles of wool, jars of oil, fresh fish, and fragrant dates. From afar came copper, tin, timber, and the deep blue stone known as lapis lazuli. Every transaction tied the city to others, near and far. Trade did not only provide goods, but also carried stories, ideas, and customs between cultures. Priests held a different role, watching over the temples and guiding the spiritual life of the people. Each day they offered food and drink to the gods, tended to sacred fires, and recited prayers. They were also administrators, keeping records of offerings, land, and labor. The temple was not only a house of worship, but also a center of storage and distribution. To the Sumerians, the Wus owned the land, and the priests served as their managers. Life in Sumer was shaped by simple but meaningful details. Houses were built from mud brick, with flat roofs and courtyards that provided light and air. Families gathered there in the evening to share meals. Meals often included bread, dates, onions, garlic, and fish from the rivers. Beer, brewed from barley, was a common drink for both rich and poor. Clothing was made from wool or flax, with men often wearing simple skirts and women draped in longer dresses. Jewelry of gold, silver, and carnelian added color and beauty, especially during festivals. Family was the heart of Sumerian life. Kinship bound people together, offering support in work, marriage, and trade. Fathers guided households, mothers managed homes and children, and extended families shared responsibilities. Inscriptions and documents show that family ties were deeply respected, and disputes were often settled by appealing to both kin and community. In the daily rhythm of farming, crafting, trading, and worship, the Sumerians created a world that was both practical and deeply connected to their beliefs. Their homes, markets, and families were the living threads that held their civilization together. Though kings and gods shaped their history, it was the steady efforts of ordinary people that gave Sumer its enduring strength. Among the many achievements of the Sumerians, none was more profound than the invention of writing. In a world where memory and spoken words had long carried tradition, The Sumerians created a way to preserve thoughts, agreements, and stories in physical form. This was not only a practical invention, but also a step that changed the course of human history. With writing, knowledge could outlast the speaker, reaching far beyond a single lifetime. The script they created is known today as cuneiform, a word that means wedge-shaped. This name comes from the marks left by a simple tool, a stylus made from reed. Pressed into soft clay, the stylus produced small, triangular impressions. By arranging these marks in patterns, scribes created symbols that stood for words, numbers, and ideas. Once the message was pressed into a tablet, the clay could be dried in the sun or baked in a kiln, preserving it for centuries. At first, writing was used for the most practical of needs. Farmers, traders, and temple officials required records to keep track of goods, land, and labor. A clay tablet might record the delivery of barley to a temple or the loan of livestock between neighbors. These early writings were simple lists, but they represented a major breakthrough. No longer did memory alone carry the burden of economy and trade. The tablet provided certainty, proof, and permanence. As writing spread, the role of the scribe became essential. Not everyone in Sumer could master the difficult symbols of cuneiform. Scribes trained for years, memorizing hundreds of signs and learning how to shape them with precision. They sat with tablets on their laps or on small wooden desks, recording transactions, treaties, and stories. In a society that valued both order and tradition, the scribe held a respected place, standing at the intersection of knowledge and power. Over time, the uses of writing grew beyond accounting. The tablets began to preserve hymns to the gods, proverbs for teaching wisdom, and instructions for rituals. Kings commissioned inscriptions that recorded their victories, their building projects, and their devotion to the divine. The voice of the city, once spoken only in gatherings, could now be impressed into clay and carried across generations. Among the many works preserved in cuneiform, none is more famous than the Epic of Gilgamesh. This great tale, written in poetic form, tells the story of a king of Uruk who seeks immortality after the death of his companion. Along his journey, Gilgamesh battles monsters, meets wise figures, and learns that the gift of life is not endless years, but the memory one leaves behind. Though the story is filled with gods and heroes, it also speaks of grief, friendship, and the search for meaning. In its lines, we can hear the voices of Sumerians reflecting on the same questions that humans still ask today. The invention of writing transformed the Sumerians from a people bound to the cycles of rivers and fields into a civilization with a recorded history. Through clay tablets, they left behind contracts, prayers, sayings, and epics that allow us to know their thoughts across thousands of years. Writing was their greatest legacy, a gift that continues to shape every word we speak and every story we tell. As the Sumerian city-states grew larger and more complex, the need for rules became clear. Life in these crowded cities required more than personal agreements or the wisdom of elders. Disputes over land, trade, and family matters could not be left to chance, nor could conflicts always be settled by the strength of one ruler. The people needed a system that would provide order, fairness, and a sense of justice. In response, the Sumerians began to create some of the earliest written laws in human history. The idea of law in Sumer was deeply connected to the gods. Just as kingship was believed to be a gift from the divine, so too was the principle of justice. The Sumerians saw law as a reflection of cosmic order, ensuring balance in both society and nature. To live without law was to invite chaos, while to follow the law was to honor the gods who had granted stability to the world. Among the earliest known law codes is that of Ur-Nammu, the king of Ur who ruled around the 21st century before the Common Era. His code was written in cuneiform and laid out rules for daily life. It dealt with matters such as marriage, theft, and bodily injury. The punishments described were not always harsh. In many cases, fines of silver were to be paid, showing that compensation and restoration were valued over cruelty. Ur-Nammu's code stands as the oldest surviving written law code in the world, a clear sign of how central justice was to the Sumerians. A little later came the code of Lipit Ishtar, ruler of the city of Isin. His laws continued the tradition of Ur-Nammu, offering guidance on property, contracts, and social relationships. The prologue to his code declared that the gods had chosen him to bring justice to the land and to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. This statement reveals the Sumerian belief that law was not simply about punishment, but about fairness and protection. The king was not only a warrior and builder, but also a guardian of equity. The concepts of justice and fairness in these early codes were striking for their time. They recognized the need to balance the rights of individuals with the needs of the community. Laws addressed disputes between farmers, merchants, and families, providing clear solutions so that conflict would not spiral into violence. Even in these earliest systems, the Sumerians understood that law was the glue that held society together. The role of law also extended beyond single cities. In a world where rival city-states often fought one another, law codes helped unify communities under a shared sense of order. A city that lived by clear and predictable rules was stronger and more stable than one ruled only by the whims of its leaders. The existence of law meant that people could trust their agreements, merchants could trade with confidence, and families could pass on property knowing their rights were protected. The birth of law in Sumer was one of the most important steps in the rise of civilization. By writing down their rules, the Sumerians ensured that justice was not left to memory or chance. They created a structure that gave meaning to fairness and gave strength to unity. Long before Hammurabi carved his famous code, the people of Sumer had already laid the foundation for the rule of law that still shapes human societies today. Although the Sumerian cities shared a common culture, they were rarely united. Each city had its own patron deity, its own ruler, and its own ambitions. The rivers and fertile fields that gave life to Sumer were also sources of conflict, for every settlement depended on the same waters to survive. Rivalries grew between cities, and in time, war became a constant presence in the land between the rivers. One of the most famous rivalries was between the cities of Lagash and Ummah. These two neighbors competed fiercely for control of fertile fields that lay along their shared border. The land between them was rich in crops but limited in size, and both cities claimed the right to farm it. Disputes arose, and with no lasting agreement, the conflicts erupted into open war. Inscriptions carved by the rulers of Lagash record battles, victories, and the capture of prisoners. The rivalry between Lagash and Ummah continued for generations, becoming one of the earliest documented struggles for territory in human history. At the heart of these conflicts was the struggle for land, water, and prestige. Control of irrigation canals meant control of life itself. A diverted canal could starve a rival city by leaving its fields dry, while flooding could ruin crops and homes. Beyond survival, victory in war also brought honor to a ruler and glory to the city's god. When one city defeated another, it was seen not only as a human triumph, but also as the favor of the divine. To defend themselves, the Sumerian cities built strong fortifications. Thick walls of mud brick, often several meters high, encircled their homes and temples. These walls symbolized both security and independence. Inside, the people could work their fields and worship their gods, knowing they were protected. Outside the walls, however, conflict brewed constantly, and raids or sieges were common. The Sumerians also developed organized armies to fight their wars. Soldiers carried spears, axes, and bows. They fought in tightly controlled ranks, moving together under the command of their leaders. One of their most notable military innovations was the war chariot. Though primitive by later standards, these chariots were pulled by donkeys and carried soldiers swiftly across the battlefield. They gave armies both speed and striking power, setting a pattern that would be followed in many cultures to come. Despite the violence, the Sumerians also sought ways to limit conflict through agreements. Some of the earliest historical records describe treaties between cities. In the case of Lagash and Ummah, inscriptions record attempts to settle their dispute by drawing boundaries and promising peace. These treaties were often sworn in the presence of gods, with both sides calling on divine judgment should the agreement be broken. Although these promises did not always last, they reveal an early recognition that peace, like war, could be structured and formalized. The endless rivalries between city-states were both destructive and creative. They brought suffering and instability, but they also drove the Sumerians to build stronger walls, develop better weapons, and create written records of their struggles. Through conflict, they left behind some of the earliest accounts of war and diplomacy. In the clash between Lagash and Umma, and in the struggles of countless other cities, we see not only the violence of the ancient world, but also the first attempts to manage conflict through laws and agreements. The wars of Sumer remind us that civilization did not rise in peace alone. It grew from the tension between cooperation and rivalry, between creation and destruction. The same forces that built the first cities also led them into battle, shaping the story of Mesopotamia for centuries to come. The land of Sumer was rich in ideas, innovation, and agriculture, yet it was poor in natural resources. The wide plains between the Tigris and Euphrates offered fertile soil, but the Sumerians had little access to stone, timber, or metals. Their cities were built with mud brick because stone was scarce, and their tools and ornaments often depended on materials brought from far away. This lack of resources did not weaken Sumer. Instead, it encouraged the Sumerians to look outward, building trade networks that stretched across much of the ancient world. Trade became the lifeline of Sumerian wealth. Farmers grew more grain than their own cities could consume, and craftsmen produced textiles, pottery, and woven goods of remarkable quality. These products could be exchanged for the raw materials that the land itself could not provide. Merchants set out with donkeys, boats, and caravans, linking Sumer to distant lands and cultures. Through trade, the Sumerians not only acquired what they needed, but also spread their influence far beyond the rivers of Mesopotamia. One of the most striking examples of this long-distance exchange was the connection between Sumer and the Indus Valley civilization. Archaeologists have discovered seals from the Indus Valley and Mesopotamian cities, along with beads and ornaments that clearly came from that distant region. In return, Sumerian goods found their way into Indus markets. Such exchanges required remarkable organization and trust, for the journey was long and filled with challenges, yet the demand for trade kept these connections alive. To the north, Sumerian merchants reached Anatolia, a land rich in metals and timber. From Anatolia came copper and tin, both essential for creating bronze, the metal that gave its name to the age. Strong timbers also traveled south, allowing the Sumerians to build sturdier roofs, ships, and wagons. To the west, links were made with Egypt, where Sumerian textiles and pottery were exchanged for gold and other prized materials. The trade routes that connected these lands were among the earliest examples of international exchange in recorded history. Among the most treasured imports was lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone brought from distant Afghanistan. Its brilliant color was used in jewelry, cylinder seals, and religious objects. To the Sumerians, lapis lazuli carried not only beauty, but also a sense of mystery, for it came from far-off mountains that few had ever seen. Alongside lapis, merchants brought silver from Anatolia, copper from Oman, and precious woods from lands far beyond Mesopotamia. These materials enriched both the temples and the palaces of Sumer. In exchange, Sumer exported the products of its own land and skill. Textiles woven from wool were among its most valued goods, known for their fine quality. Barley and other grains were shipped to regions where fertile fields were scarce. Pottery, both plain and decorated, traveled with these shipments, providing both utility and beauty. With every transaction, Sumerian goods carried the mark of their culture, spreading the reach of Mesopotamian influence. Trade was not simply about wealth. It was a source of connection. Merchants returned from their journeys not only with goods, but also with stories, ideas, and influences. In this way, Sumer became part of a larger world, linked by exchange to distant peoples. The wealth of Sumerian cities was built on the constant movement of goods and the tireless efforts of traders. Without these networks, the cities of mud brick and ziggurats would not have thrived. The story of Sumer is therefore not only a story of rivers and fields, but also a story of roads, caravans, and ships. In every grain of barley sent abroad and in every piece of lapis brought home, we can see how trade shaped the destiny of the first great civilization. The Sumerians were not only builders of cities and creators of writing, they were also lovers of art, music, and ritual. Within their temples, homes, and palaces, they surrounded themselves with objects of beauty and meaning. Through their creativity, they sought to honor the goddesses, to display their wealth, and to give shape to the values of their society. The culture of Sumer was as rich in spirit as it was in invention. One of the most distinctive artistic expressions of Sumer was the cylinder seal. These small, carved stones were used to roll impressions onto wet clay. The patterns and scenes engraved on them ranged from images of gods and animals to elaborate depictions of banquets or battles. Every seal was unique, often serving as a personal signature for its owner. Merchants, priests, and officials carried them, leaving their mark on tablets as proof of authenticity. Beyond their practical use, the seals were tiny works of art, filled with detail and craftsmanship. Jewelry was another form of Sumerian artistry. Men and women alike adorned themselves with necklaces, earrings, and bracelets made from gold, silver, and imported stones such as carnelian and lapis lazuli. These ornaments were more than decoration. They carried symbolic meaning, often connected to protection or devotion to the gods. Excavations of royal tombs in Ur have revealed treasures of dazzling beauty, with intricate designs that show the skill of Sumerian goldsmiths and lapidaries. Statues, too, filled their temples and homes, carved from stone or cast in bronze. Many of these figures depicted worshippers with wide, staring eyes, eternally offering devotion to the gods on behalf of their owners. Music played a central role in Sumerian life. Perhaps the most famous instruments are the harps and lyres found in the royal tombs of Ur. Decorated with gold, silver, and precious stones, these instruments reveal both the artistry and the importance of music in ceremony and ritual. Music accompanied religious processions, temple offerings, and celebrations. Alongside harps, drums, and flutes filled the air with sound. Through rhythm and song, the Sumerians gave voice to both joy and reverence. Poetry and hymn writing also flourished. Sumerian scribes recorded prayers, laments, and songs dedicated to the gods. Hymns praised deities such as Inanna, Enlil, and Enki, describing their powers and blessings. These works were often recited or sung during rituals, giving worship a poetic form. The combination of music and poetry reflected a culture where art was inseparable from devotion. Architecture provided another grand stage for creativity. The ziggurat, rising high above the city, was not only a religious center, but also a symbol of both engineering and artistic achievement. Built of mud brick, these massive stepped towers were covered in decorative elements and painted surfaces. At their summit, temples stood as the meeting place between earth and heaven. Within the cities, temples and palaces displayed reliefs, statues, and ceremonial spaces that combined practicality with grandeur. Festivals and rituals gave rhythm to cultural life. Throughout the year, communities gathered to honor their gods with processions, offerings, and music. These events were moments of shared identity, drawing families and neighbors together. Some festivals celebrated agricultural cycles, thanking the gods for harvests or seeking blessings for planting. Others marked victories, coronations, or temple dedications. Each celebration was both a religious act and a cultural expression, blending art, music, food, and community. The art, music, and culture of Sumer reveal a people who sought beauty and meaning in every aspect of life. From the delicate impressions of cylinder seals to the mighty steps of ziggurats, from the quiet devotion of statues to the vibrant notes of harps, the Sumerians filled their world with creativity. Their culture was not only an adornment to daily life, but also a bridge between the human and the divine. The Sumerians are remembered not only for their cities and kings, but also for their remarkable achievements in science and knowledge. Their inventions and discoveries laid the foundation for many aspects of daily life that we still depend on today. From the wheel to calendars, from mathematics to medicine, their legacy and learning is a reminder of how curiosity and necessity can shape the course of history. Among their greatest inventions was the wheel. First created for potters, it allowed craftspeople to shape clay more quickly and with greater precision. Soon, the wheel was adapted for carts and wagons, making it possible to move goods and people with greater ease. When combined with the power of animals, the wheel transformed transportation and trade, allowing cities to remain connected across larger distances. This simple but profound tool became one of the most enduring symbols of human progress. The Sumerians also developed the plow, an invention that changed farming forever. By attaching the plow to oxen, farmers could till larger fields more efficiently. This innovation allowed the cultivation of more land, leading to increased harvests and stronger food supplies. With the plow, farming shifted from a slow and demanding task to a more productive process, feeding the growing cities of Sumer and supporting their population. Another key innovation was the sailboat. The Tigris and Euphrates were powerful rivers that carried goods and people across Mesopotamia. By attaching sails to boats, the Sumerians harnessed the power of the wind, allowing travel both with and against the river's current. This greatly expanded their ability to trade, turning rivers into highways of culture and commerce. With the wheel, the plow, and the sailboat, the Sumerians gave the world a set of tools that shaped civilizations for millennia. Mathematics was another field in which the Sumerians excelled. They developed a base 60 system that remains with us today in the way we divide hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. This system allowed them to measure time, space, and quantity with precision. Their knowledge of numbers supported trade, construction, and astronomy. It also led to the first known multiplication and division tables, as well as formulas for calculating areas and volumes. Astronomy held a special place in Sumerian learning. By watching the movement of stars, planets, and the moon, they created calendars to guide farming and religious festivals. Their observations of celestial cycles allowed them to predict seasons, floods, and eclipses. For the Sumerians, astronomy was not only practical, but also spiritual, linking the heavens with the fate of human beings. Their careful records of the skies were among the earliest steps toward the science of astronomy. Medicine also played a role in their pursuit of knowledge. Clay tablets record treatments for illnesses, combining practical remedies with spiritual rituals. Some cures involved herbs and oils, while others called on prayers and incantations to drive out disease. Although their understanding of the body was limited, their efforts to heal show an early blending of science and belief. These medical texts reveal a society deeply concerned with the health and survival of its people. The legacy of Sumerian science is still visible in the ways we measure time, divide space, and organize daily life. Their inventions shaped transportation, agriculture, and trade. Their mathematics shaped how we understand numbers and geometry. Their astronomy guided human awareness of the heavens. By seeking knowledge, the Sumerians built tools not only for their own world, but also for all the generations that followed. In the long story of Sumer, certain names rise above others, glowing with the light of both history and myth. The line between truth and legend was often blurred, for the Sumerians saw their rulers not only as leaders of men, but also as figures touched by the divine. In their memory, kings became heroes, and heroes became larger than life. The tales that survive from this time offer us glimpses of real events colored with the richness of imagination and belief. Among these figures, none is more famous than Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk. He appears in the Sumerian king list as a ruler who reigned for more than a century, and though the details of his life are uncertain, his fame endured in story and song. The Epic of Gilgamesh, recorded centuries after his time, presents him as a mighty warrior and builder who sought to understand the meaning of life and death. In the story, Gilgamesh wrestles with the wild man Enkidu, who becomes his closest companion. Together they face challenges, battle monsters, and journey across the world. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is overcome with grief and sets out on a quest to find the secret of immortality. His search teaches him that eternal life is not given to mortals, and that human greatness lies instead in the legacy one leaves behind. Through this tale, Gilgamesh became not only a king, but also a symbol of the human struggle against loss and time. Another ruler celebrated in both history and legend was Enmerkar, also of Uruk. He is remembered as a builder, credited with strengthening the great city and expanding its power. Stories describe him as a man of clever words and determination, engaged in struggles with neighboring lands. In one tale, Enmerkar's ambition to rule over Arata, a distant and wealthy land, leads to a contest of wits and endurance. Though the details may be myth, they reflect the memory of Uruk's rising influence in the earliest days of city building. A different kind of story is told about Lugal-Zaggisi, king of Umma. Unlike Gilgamesh and Enmerkar, whose deeds were wrapped in legend, Lugal-Zaggisi left behind clear historical evidence. He rose to power by conquering rival cities, including Lagash, and for a time he united much of Sumer under his rule. Inscriptions describe him as chosen by the gods to bring order, but his reign was short-lived. His dream of unity ended when Sargon of Akkad rose to power and defeated him, beginning a new era of Mesopotamian history. Still, Lugal-Zaggisi remains an important figure, remembered as the last great Sumerian king before the rise of the Akkadian Empire. The stories of Gilgamesh, Enmerkar, and Lugal-Zaggisi reveal how deeply the Sumerians intertwined myth and history. Kings were not remembered only for their victories in battle or their skill in building walls and temples. They were also celebrated in stories that gave their lives meaning beyond simple fact. By weaving myth with reality, the Sumerians created a tapestry of memory that preserved their rulers as heroes, teachers, and symbols of divine favor. In these legendary kings, we see both the imagination and the memory of Sumer. Their lives remind us that history is not only a record of what happened, but also a reflection of what people believed, hoped, and dreamed. The independence of the Sumerian city-states could not last forever. Their rivalries and wars, their endless struggles for land and water, left them vulnerable to the rise of new powers. Out of the northern region of Mesopotamia emerged a man whose ambition and skill would change the course of history. His name was Sargon, remembered as Sargon the Great, and he became the first ruler to unite Sumer under one empire. The story of Sargon begins in legend. According to tradition, he was born the son of a humble family and set adrift as an infant in a basket upon the river. Rescued and raised by a gardener, he eventually rose to serve a king, only to overthrow him and seize power for himself. Whether these details are true or not, they reveal how Sargon was remembered, as a man who rose from obscurity to greatness by the strength of his will and the favor of the gods. Once in power, Sargon built a new capital city at Akkad, from which the Akkadian Empire would take its name. He assembled a disciplined army and marched southward, conquering the great cities of Sumer. One by one, the ancient city-states fell under his rule, from Ur and Uruk to Lagash and Umma. Unlike earlier kings who ruled over a single city, Sargon claimed dominion over the entire land of Sumer and beyond. He extended his reach to the north, the east, and even toward the Mediterranean, creating what many historians see as the first true empire in history. The unification of Sumer under Akkadian rule brought profound changes. Administration that had once been confined to a single city now had to govern vast territories. Sargon placed trusted officials, often his own family members, in charge of conquered cities. Through this system, he created a network of authority that allowed him to control lands stretching far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates. Language also shifted during this period. While Sumerian had been the tongue of government and culture, Akkadian, a Semitic language, rose in prominence. Records began to be written in Akkadian as well as in Sumerian, and over time Akkadian would become the dominant spoken language of Mesopotamia. Yet the Sumerian tongue did not vanish. It continued to be used in temples, in scholarship, and in sacred texts, much as Latin remained in later centuries. In this way, Sumerian culture endured even as political power passed into new hands. Despite the might of Sargon and his successors, the spirit of Sumer proved remarkably resilient. The ziggurats still rose above the cities, offerings were still made to the ancient gods, and scribes continued to copy hymns and epics in the old language. The Akkadian kings understood the importance of Sumerian tradition and often presented themselves as protectors of Sumer's gods and temples. Rather than erase the culture they conquered, they absorbed it, carrying Sumerian ideas and practices into the wider world of Mesopotamia. The Akkadian conquest marks both an ending and a beginning. It ended the age of independent city-states that had defined Sumer for centuries, but it also began the age of empires that would dominate Mesopotamia for the next 2,000 years. Through conquest, administration, and cultural blending, Sargon the Great set a model for kingship that others would follow. And through resilience, the Sumerians ensured that their language, their gods, and their stories continued to shape the land, even under foreign rule. The fall of the Akkadian Empire did not mean the end of Sumerian culture. After years of upheaval, invasions, and shifting powers, the Sumerians once again rose to prominence. This renewal is often called the Neo-Sumerian period, or the time of the third dynasty of Ur, known as Ur III. It was a moment of revival, a final flowering of Sumerian civilization that would leave a lasting mark on history. At the heart of this revival stood the city of Ur. From this ancient settlement, the kings of Ur III extended their power across much of Mesopotamia. Among these rulers, Ur-Nammu stands out as one of the most important. He is remembered for both his military skill and his vision of order and justice. Ur-Nammu issued one of the earliest surviving written law codes, a document that laid down clear rules for society. His code stressed fairness and the protection of the weak, with punishments that often emphasize compensation over violence. By setting down these laws in writing, Ur-Nammu strengthened both his authority and the unity of his people. Ur-Nammu was also a great builder. Under his reign, the city of Ur experienced a remarkable transformation. He began the construction of the great ziggurat of Ur, one of the most impressive monuments of Mesopotamian history. Rising high above the plain, the ziggurats symbolized the bond between heaven and earth, linking the people with their gods. Temples, administrative buildings, and defensive walls were also rebuilt, reflecting a new age of stability and confidence. His successors continued these projects, ensuring that Ur stood as both a political and a spiritual center. The period of Ur III was marked by a flourishing of art and culture. Scribes copied and preserved Sumerian hymns, myths, and epic tales, including works that had been passed down for centuries. The preservation of the Epic of Gilgamesh owes much to this time. Statues, cylinder seals, and jewelry reveal the skill of craftsmen who worked with stone, metal, and precious gems. The arts were not only decorative but also served religious and political purposes, presenting kings as chosen by the gods and reinforcing the sacred order of society. Bureaucracy also expanded to new levels of complexity during the Ur III dynasty. Clay tablets record detailed accounts of trade, taxation, land use, and labor. The administration kept close records of the movement of goods, the work of farmers, and the duties of citizens. This careful organization allowed the state to manage resources effectively and to maintain control over a wide territory. The image of the Sumerians as skilled record keepers is nowhere more evident than in the thousands of tablets from this period, which give us a clear picture of their daily life. Trade thrived once more. Ur's merchants reached distant lands, exchanging grain and textiles for metals, stone, and wood. The prosperity of this network supported the growth of cities and filled the temples with offerings. For a time, it seemed as if Sumer had regained its former glory, stronger and more organized than ever before. Yet this golden age was also the last. Pressures from neighboring peoples and internal weaknesses eventually wore down the power of Ur. Invasions from the Elamites and the Amorites brought an end to the dynasty. Still, the achievements of Ur III ensured that the spirit of Sumer did not vanish. Its laws, its literature, its art, and its vision of kingship influenced the civilizations that followed, from Babylon to Assyria and beyond. The revival of Ur was both a return and a farewell, the final moment of Sumer's greatness before decline. Its legacy, however, endured, shaping Mesopotamia and leaving an imprint on the story of human civilization. The story of the Sumerians is one of brilliance and resilience, but even the most remarkable civilizations faced decline. For centuries, Sumer had thrived in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, yet the very environment that made life possible also contributed to its eventual weakening. Combined with invasions from powerful neighbors and the rise of new cultures, these challenges slowly brought the age of the Sumerians to a close. One of the greatest threats came not from armies, but from the soil itself. Generations of farming had relied on irrigation systems that diverted river water to fields. Over time, this constant watering left behind layers of salt in the soil. As the salinity increased, crops grew weaker and harvests declined. Barley, which was more resistant to salt, replaced wheat as the primary grain, but even barley could not fully withstand the worsening conditions. What had once been rich farmland gradually became barren, forcing communities to struggle for survival. The rivers, too, shifted their courses. The Tigris and Euphrates were unpredictable, sometimes flooding violently, other times leaving canals dry. Cities that had once thrived along steady waterways found themselves cut off from trade and irrigation. Managing these rivers required immense cooperation and labor, yet constant warfare among city-states made long-term solutions difficult. Environmental stress weakened the very foundation on which Sumer had been built. At the same time, external pressures mounted. The Gutians, a people from the Zagros Mountains, swept into Mesopotamia and disrupted the order of the land. Their raids destabilized Sumer, weakening its cities and trade. Later, the Elamites from the east and the Amorites from the west struck at Sumerian lands. These groups did not simply raid, but also sought to claim territory and power. Step by step, the political independence of Sumerian cities faded under the weight of invasion. The cultural identity of the Sumerians also began to change. As the Akkadian language grew in use, particularly in administration and daily life, Sumerian became more and more a language of scholarship and religion rather than of common speech. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, Sumerian was no longer spoken as a living language, though it continued to be studied by scribes. In this way, the people of the land gradually shifted their identity, blending into the rising cultures of Akkad and later Babylon. Despite the decline, the memory of Sumer did not disappear. Babylonian and Assyrian kings honored Sumerian traditions, copying texts and hymns and preserving the myths of gods and heroes. The Epic of Gilgamesh survived because later scribes treasured the stories of Uruk's legendary king. Temples continued to echo with Sumerian prayers long after the language had ceased to be spoken. Even as political dominance passed to others, the foundations laid by the Sumerians remained deeply embedded in Mesopotamian life. The fall of Sumer was not sudden but gradual. Fields became poorer, rivers grew less reliable, and enemies pressed from every side. Little by little, the vibrant heart of Sumer dimmed, yet its spirit lived on in the cultures that followed, shaping law, literature, religion, and kingship across the ancient world. Though the Sumerians faded as a people, their legacy became part of the shared heritage of humanity. For centuries after the decline of Sumer, the ruins of their cities lay buried beneath sand and soil. The ziggurats crumbled into silent mounds, canals dried into empty channels, and the voices of the Sumerians seemed lost to time. The memory of their kings and gods lingered faintly in later Babylonian and Assyrian traditions. But the world largely forgot the people who had once built the first great cities. To the eyes of later generations, the land between the rivers was filled with mystery, its past hidden beneath layers of earth. It was not until the modern age that the story of Sumer was rediscovered. In the 19th century, explorers and archaeologists began to dig into the ancient mounds of Mesopotamia. At first, what they found seemed puzzling. Broken tablets covered in wedge-shaped marks, fragments of statues, and the remains of vast walls and temples. Slowly, scholars realized that they were uncovering the remnants of the world's earliest civilization. The wedge-shaped symbols turned out to be cuneiform writing, and with patience, linguists learned to read it. As the tablets were translated, the forgotten voices of the Sumerians spoke once again. They revealed accounts of daily life, laws, hymns, and myths. They gave us the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Ur-Nammu, and countless records of trade, farming, and devotion. Every clay tablet was a time capsule, carrying us back 5,000 years, woe to the thoughts and concerns of people who once walked the streets of Ur and Uruk. Archaeology transformed silent ruins into living history, allowing the world to rediscover Sumer's genius. The rediscovery of Sumer not only expanded our understanding of the past, but also reshaped how we view the story of humanity. It showed that the roots of writing, law, mathematics, and urban life reached back farther than many had imagined. It revealed that the human desire to build, to record, to create stories, and to seek justice was already flourishing in the earliest cities. Though the people of Sumer are gone, their spirit endures in every society that came after them. As we reflect on their legacy, we can see their influence in countless ways. The calendar that guides our days, the divisions of time into hours and minutes, the written words that preserve knowledge, and the very idea of law and order all carry echoes of Sumer. Though the cities fell silent, the voices of the Sumerians echo in every law, every written word, and every story humanity tells. Their vision of life, shaped in the cradle of Mesopotamia, continues to resonate through the centuries. And now, as this journey through their history comes to a close, let the stories settle gently in your mind. The Sumerians once gazed at the same stars that shine above you tonight. They dreamed, they built, they sang, and they rested beneath the endless sky. Rest now as the Sumerians once did beneath the stars over Mesopotamia. Their story continues in us and in your dreams tonight.